May 31st, 1945. Okinawa. The Shuri Line. The morning air hung thick with the stench of cordite and death. Through drifting smoke that clung to the ravaged hillsides, the men of Company G, 2nd Battalion, 382nd Infantry Regiment, lay pressed into shallow foxholes carved from coral and mud. Their uniforms were caked with filth. Their faces bore the hollow stare of soldiers who had seen too many friends die. Above them, just 200 yards distant, loomed a rise the maps identified as Hen Hill. To anyone else, it looked insignificant. A gentle slope crowned with scrub brush, another nameless piece of Okinawan landscape. But to the men of Company G, Hen Hill had become something else entirely. A fortress, a graveyard, the hill that ate men. For 3 days they had tried to take it. 3 days of assaults that ended in blood and retreat. The Japanese defenders had transformed that modest elevation into a killing machine. Machine gun nests carved deep into coral bedrock. Rifle pits connected by tunnels that ran beneath the surface like veins. Mortar positions hidden in caves, their crews invisible until the shells began falling. Every approach had been measured, every firing lane calculated. The defenders knew exactly where to aim before the first American soldier even appeared. And they had orders that allowed only one outcome: hold until death. The bodies still lay on the slope. Some were friends Kraft had shared cigarettes with just days before. Now they were silent reminders of what happened when flesh tried to storm fortified stone. The wounded who could be recovered had been dragged back under fire, leaving trails in the mud. Those who couldn't be reached remained where they fell, becoming part of the hill itself. Company G had lost count of how many. Too many. And the hill still stood, defiant, deadly, waiting for the next wave. Private First Class Clarence B. Kraft sat in his foxhole and ran through his equipment one final time. The M1 Garand rifle leaned against his shoulder, loaded, ready. Across his chest, canvas ammunition pouches sagged heavy with 8-round clips. But it was the bag beside him that held his real arsenal: Mk2 fragmentation grenades. More than a dozen of them, each one a pound of serrated cast iron wrapped around 2 ounces of TNT. The pineapples, soldiers called them, for the grid pattern stamped into the metal casing. Pull the pin, release the lever, 4 seconds to detonation, 50 fragments of shrapnel radiating outward at lethal velocity. Simple, reliable, deadly. Slung across his back, wrapped in waterproof canvas, rode a satchel charge. 20 pounds of high explosive with a fuse that burned fast and angry. Light it, throw it, take cover, or don't take cover and die in the blast. The choice was yours. Orders filtered down the line in terse whispers. Another assault. Another attempt to crack Hen Hill. Kraft watched his fellow soldiers prepare. Some checked their rifles with trembling hands. Others stared at nothing, faces blank, masks hiding whatever terror churned inside. A few whispered prayers to gods they hoped were listening. Everyone knew what came next. The whistle would blow. They would climb out of their holes. They would advance toward that hill. And some of them would never come back. It was math, cold, brutal, inevitable. But what if one man, moving fast, using speed instead of caution, could change that math? Could one soldier with a bag of grenades break what an entire company could not? Okinawa sat just 350 miles south of Japan, close enough to smell the homeland, close enough to become the staging ground for the final invasion. For the Americans, the island represented strategic necessity: airfields for B-29 bombers, harbors for the invasion fleet. A springboard for the assault on Kyushu and ultimately Tokyo itself. For the Japanese, Okinawa was the last barrier protecting the sacred soil of Japan. Lose here, and the Emperor's Divine Islands would face direct invasion. Both sides understood the stakes. This would not be a battle of maneuver or negotiation. This would be annihilation warfare, fought until one side could no longer continue. The invasion commenced on April 1st, 1945. Easter Sunday, L-Day. Over 180,000 American troops stormed ashore expecting apocalyptic resistance. Instead, they found empty beaches, abandoned positions, an eerie silence that felt like a trap. It was. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima had spent months preparing a defense-in-depth strategy that learned from every previous Japanese defeat. No more banzai charges into American machine guns. No more wasting troops defending indefensible beaches. Instead, he pulled his 110,000 soldiers into the southern third of Okinawa, into a fortress network carved from limestone ridges and anchored on terrain that favored the defender absolutely. The Shuri Line formed the backbone of this defense. A series of fortified hills, ridges, and escarpments radiating outward from the ancient Shuri castle, each position reinforced with concrete pillboxes, coral bunkers, and interconnected tunnel systems that ran hundreds of yards beneath the surface. Japanese engineers had spent months preparing these defenses. They carved artillery caves into hillsides, stockpiled ammunition in underground chambers, created ventilation shafts disguised as natural rock formations. They positioned machine guns to provide interlocking fields of fire. They pre-registered mortar coordinates on every likely avenue of approach. They built a fortress designed to bleed the American advance white. By late May, the 96th Infantry Division had been hammering against the Shuri Line for weeks. The Deadeyes, veterans of the Philippines campaign, soldiers who had learned the hard lessons of jungle warfare and emerged harder, grimmer, more efficient. They had already taken hills with names that would haunt them forever. Conical Hill, Sugarloaf, Chocolate Drop. Each one had cost hundreds of casualties. Each one had seemed like the breakthrough position. And each time, another ridge appeared beyond, another line of bunkers, another network of defenders who refused to surrender or retreat. The Japanese 62nd Division held this sector of the line. Professional soldiers, most of them. Men who had fought in China, who understood infantry tactics and defensive warfare. They were undersupplied, cut off from reinforcement, and knew they would never leave Okinawa alive. Orders from Imperial headquarters were explicit. Delay the American advance as long as possible. Make them pay for every yard. Die in place rather than withdraw. The defense of Hen Hill embodied that philosophy perfectly. The position dominated the surrounding terrain, providing observation over the entire valley. Japanese artillery spotters on that hill could direct fire with devastating accuracy. Mortars positioned in caves at the base could saturate any approach with high explosive shells. Machine guns in coral bunkers covered every possible route up the slope. Company G had bloodied itself against Hen Hill for 3 days running. The first assault followed standard doctrine. Artillery preparation pounded the hill for 20 minutes, shells churning the earth, raising clouds of smoke and coral dust. Then the infantry advanced in squad rushes, using cover where it existed, moving fast across open ground, trying to get close enough to use grenades and Bangalore torpedoes. The Japanese waited until the Americans were exposed, then opened fire with everything: machine guns, rifles, knee mortars that dropped shells with horrifying accuracy. The assault stalled halfway up the slope, men pinned down in shell craters, unable to advance or retreat safely. Medics crawled forward to drag the wounded back. The dead stayed. The second assault tried flanking from the east, using smoke grenades to conceal movement. The Japanese had seen that tactic before. They fired blindly into the smoke, hosing the hillside with automatic fire, knowing Americans would be there somewhere. When the smoke cleared, more bodies littered the slope. The third assault, launched at dusk, achieved slightly better results. A squad actually reached the hilltop, grenades flying, rifle fire cracking in the twilight. For 10 minutes it seemed possible. Then Japanese reinforcements boiled out of tunnels no one knew existed, and the surviving Americans had to fight their way back down in darkness, leaving their dead behind. By May 31st, Company G was exhausted, depleted, and facing another order to attack the same hill that had already killed so many of their friends. Morale teetered on the edge. Officers tried to project confidence, but everyone could see the doubt in their eyes. Something had to change. Someone had to find a different approach. Clarence Craft had been watching, thinking, calculating. He was 25 years old, a volunteer from California who had joined the Army in 1943 without any particular ambition beyond doing his duty. His service record showed nothing remarkable. No previous heroics, no commendations for valor. Just another rifleman trying to survive long enough to go home. But Craft understood something fundamental about the Japanese defense. It was designed to stop methodical, coordinated assaults. The bunkers and tunnels allowed defenders to shift position, to concentrate fire where it was needed, to withdraw when overwhelmed and counterattack from another angle. That mobility was their strength, but it required time. Time to observe the attack developing, time to reposition, time to coordinate fields of fire. What if there was no time? What if one man moved so fast, with such violence of action, that the defenders couldn't adapt? The Eminki-2 grenade was America's answer to close combat in defensive terrain. Cast iron body wrapped around 2 ounces of TNT. The serrated grooves weren't just decorative. They were fracture lines, designed to fragment the casing into approximately 50 pieces of shrapnel radiating outward at lethal velocity. The effective casualty radius was about 30 feet, though fragments could wound at double that distance. The fuse was simple, reliable, almost foolproof. Pull the pin, release the spoon lever, and you had 4 to 5 seconds before detonation. Enough time to throw it accurately, not enough time to hesitate. American industrial capacity had turned these grenades into something approaching ammunition. Factories across the United States produced them by the millions. Every infantry company had crates of them. Supply sergeants handed them out by the bagful. The abundance was staggering. A single American division on Okinawa possessed more grenades than the entire Japanese garrison had started the battle with. American soldiers could afford to throw grenades liberally, could use them to suppress enemy positions, could toss them into caves and bunkers without worrying about conservation. The Japanese, by contrast, rationed every grenade, saved them for critical moments, made each one count because they had so few. The Type 97 hand grenade used by Japanese forces was effective but complicated. It required the user to strike a friction igniter against a hard surface before throwing, adding an extra step in combat that could prove fatal in close quarters. Japanese soldiers practiced the motion until it became automatic, but under fire, under pressure, mistakes happened. And they simply didn't have enough. Japanese defenders on hills like Hen counted their grenades as carefully as they counted cartridges, knowing resupply would never come, knowing they had to make their limited ammunition last as long as possible. Kraft's plan crystallized as he sat in his foxhole that morning. He would go forward alone, not with his squad, not in a coordinated rush, but solo. He would move fast, use every scrap of cover, and close with the Japanese positions before they could coordinate a response. He would work his way up the hill systematically, bunker by bunker, foxhole by foxhole, using grenades to clear each position. The Japanese would see him coming. They would shoot at him. But if he moved fast enough, violently enough, he might survive long enough to break their defense from within. It was insane. It violated every principle of infantry tactics. You never advanced alone. You never exposed yourself without covering fire. You never assaulted a fortified position without overwhelming firepower and numerical advantage. Every tactical manual, every training instructor, every combat veteran would tell you the same thing. Solo assaults were suicide. But Kraft had watched 3 days of coordinated assaults fail. He had watched good men die, trying to do it the right way. Sometimes the right way didn't work. Sometimes you needed someone crazy enough to do the impossible. He checked his grenades one more time. Pins secure but easy to pull. Spoons held tight by the pins. No rust on the fuses. No damage to the bodies. Each one ready to kill. He had 14 of them. 14 chances to destroy Japanese positions. 14 opportunities to break the fortress that had held Company G at bay. The satchel charge would be his final argument. The knockout punch after the grenade softened the defense. 20 pounds of high explosive could collapse bunkers, seal tunnels, turn fortifications into tombs. The officers were briefing squad leaders for another assault. Standard tactics, artillery prep, smoke, coordinated advance. Kraft didn't wait for orders. He simply stood up, slung his rifle, grabbed his bag of grenades, and started walking toward Hen Hill. Alone. Men in nearby foxholes stared. Someone shouted a question. Kraft didn't answer. He just kept walking, steady and deliberate, toward the hill that had killed so many. Behind him, soldiers watched in stunned silence. Some thought he had snapped, lost his mind to combat stress. Others recognized something different in his posture, his pace, his absolute determination. This wasn't a suicidal charge. This was calculated violence about to be unleashed. The first Japanese shots came when Kraft was 50 yards from the base of the hill. Rifle fire, single shots from marksmen who had been watching the American positions all morning. Bullets cracked past his head, kicked up coral dust at his feet. Kraft dropped into a shell crater, pressed himself flat, let his heart rate settle. The enemy had seen him. Good. They would focus on him, one target, and maybe miss the bigger picture of what he was about to do. He scanned the slope above, identifying firing positions by muzzle flash and the telltale puff of dust from rifle ports. 3 positions visible: machine gun nest halfway up on the left, rifle pit near the crest, Another bunker near the summit, concrete reinforced, probably the strong point. He pulled a grenade from his bag. The metal was cool against his palm despite the tropical heat. His thumb found the pin, pulled it free with a metallic click that seemed impossibly loud. The spoon stayed pressed against the grenade body, held by his grip. He rose to one knee, spotted his target, threw hard. The grenade arced through the air, spinning slightly, and dropped into the machine gun position. Kraft was already diving flat before it exploded. The blast came with a deep crump that punched the air, followed by the whistle of shrapnel fragments slicing through space where human bodies had been seconds before. The machine gun went silent. Kraft sprinted forward while smoke still billowed from the destroyed position. Speed. Speed was everything now. Don't let them recover. Don't give them time to aim. He ran in a crouch, zigzagging between rocks and shell craters, covering 30 yards before the next shots came. These were closer, more accurate. The Japanese defenders had overcome their shock and were ranging in on this lone madman charging their fortress. A bullet tugged at his sleeve. Another struck his helmet with a ringing clang that left his ears screaming, but the helmet held, the round deflecting away. Kraft threw himself behind a coral outcropping and immediately pulled another grenade. This time he cooked it, held the grenade after pulling the pin, letting the fuse burn for 2 seconds before throwing. The technique was risky. If you miscounted, the grenade detonated in your hand. But it gave the enemy no time to react, no chance to pick it up and throw it back. His throw was perfect, dropping the grenade directly into a rifle pit where 3 Japanese soldiers had been firing at him. The explosion came instantly, a flash of orange fire and black smoke. When it cleared, the position was silent. Kraft didn't wait to confirm kills. Already moving, already pulling the next grenade, already focused on the bunker above. The hillside erupted in fire. The Japanese realized this wasn't reconnaissance or a feint. This was a genuine assault, one man trying to do what entire squads had failed to accomplish. Every defender who could bring weapons to bear opened fire. Rifles cracked. A light machine gun chattered from somewhere near the summit. Mortar shells began falling, the crews in the caves at the base trying to drop rounds on the American moving up their hill. Kraft heard the whistling descent, threw himself sideways, felt the concussion as a mortar shell detonated 20 feet away. Shrapnel whined overhead. Coral fragments pelted him like hail. He came up running, never slowing, because to slow down was to die. Another bunker appeared, this one dug into the hillside with coral blocks reinforcing the entrance. The aperture was narrow, maybe 18 inches wide, just enough for a rifle barrel to protrude. Kraft could see the muzzle flash from inside, could see the coral chips flying as bullets searched for him. He pulled 2 grenades simultaneously, pins out, spoons flying free as he released them. A 2-second cook on both, then he threw them in rapid succession. The first grenade bounced off the bunker face and rolled inside the aperture. The second followed half a second later. Kraft was already diving behind cover when both exploded within the confined space of the bunker. The blast was muffled, contained by the coral walls, but absolutely lethal to anyone inside. Smoke poured from the aperture. No more muzzle flashes. He was halfway up the hill now, alone in a killing zone, and somehow still alive. Behind him, Company G had stopped preparing for their own assault. Every man watched this impossible scene unfolding. Their crazy California rifleman was actually doing it. Grenades kept flying. Explosions kept erupting. Japanese positions kept falling silent. Officers shouted orders to provide covering fire. Rifles cracked from the American lines, bullets snapping past Kraft's head to suppress enemy positions. Machine guns opened up, hosing the hilltop with suppressive fire that forced Japanese defenders to keep their heads down. Kraft barely noticed. He was locked into a combat trance, moving on instinct and training, the world reduced to immediate threats and immediate responses. Grenade pin pulled, throw, take cover, move, repeat. The bag on his hip grew lighter. His ammunition pouches sagged empty. His hands were raw from the rough metal of grenade bodies. Blood ran from a dozen small cuts where shrapnel had grazed him. His uniform was torn. His helmet had 3 fresh dents from bullets that should have killed him. None of it mattered. Only the next bunker mattered. Only the next throw. A Japanese soldier burst from a spider hole 10 feet away, bayoneted rifle swinging toward Kraft's chest. No time for grenades. Kraft dropped the bag, brought his M1 Garand up, fired from the hip. One shot. The enemy soldier crumpled. Kraft didn't stop to verify. Already moving, already pulling another grenade because more targets appeared. A fighting position carved into coral, 3 defenders with rifles, all firing at once. The grenade dropped perfectly between them. The explosion turned the position into a crater. The Japanese defense was collapsing into chaos. They had trained for coordinated American assaults, for suppressing fire and flanking maneuvers. They hadn't trained for this. One man, moving too fast to track, throwing grenades with mechanical precision, advancing through fire that should have killed him 10 times over. Radio operators shouted for reinforcements. Squad leaders tried to organize counterattacks. But Kraft was already inside their defensive perimeter, among their positions, turning their carefully prepared fortress into a series of isolated bunkers he could destroy one by one. He reached a tunnel entrance, a black opening in the coral that exhaled cool, damp air from the hill's interior. Shapes moved in the darkness. Voices called in Japanese, urgent, panicked. Kraft pulled his second-to-last grenade, cooked it for 3 seconds, then tossed it underhand into the tunnel mouth. He turned away, covered his ears, opened his mouth to equalize pressure. The explosion inside the tunnel was apocalyptic, amplified by confinement, the blast wave racing through the passages, killing anyone close, collapsing sections of tunnel, sealing off reinforcement routes. Secondary explosions followed as stored ammunition cooked off in the heat. Flames licked from the tunnel mouth, black smoke boiling out. 1 grenade left. Kraft pulled it, felt the weight, looked toward the summit. The main bunker stood there, concrete reinforced, the command post for this section of the line. Japanese officers inside would be coordinating what remained of the defense, calling for artillery support, trying to organize a counterattack. That bunker was the keystone. Break it, and Hen Hill would fall. But 1 grenade wouldn't be enough. The concrete was too thick, the construction too solid. For that bunker, he needed the satchel charge. Kraft slung his rifle, shrugged the heavy canvas bag off his shoulder, and began climbing toward the summit. Bullets still searched for him. A rifle round punched through his canteen, water spraying out. Another clipped his webbing, severing a strap. He ignored all of it. 20 more yards. 15. The bunker aperture was firing steadily, tracers reaching out toward the American lines below. They hadn't seen him yet, focused on the larger threat of Company G. 10 yards. Kraft pulled the fuse igniter on the satchel charge, heard the hiss as it lit, began counting seconds in his head. 5 yards. He rose from cover, sprinted forward, and hurled the 20-pound bomb directly through the bunker's firing aperture. The Japanese inside had perhaps 1 second to understand what had just landed among them. Not enough time to react, not enough time to throw it back out. The satchel charge detonated with a roar that shook the entire hill. The bunker disintegrated, concrete blocks flying outward. The reinforced walls no match for 20 pounds of high explosive detonating in confined space. The blast wave knocked Kraft flat 30 feet away. His ears rang with a high, terrible whine. Coral dust settled over everything like snow. Silence fell across Hen Hill, the kind of silence that follows overwhelming violence when even the wounded are too shocked to scream. Kraft lay on his back, staring at the sky, trying to remember how to breathe. Slowly, his hearing returned. First as muffled sounds, then sharper, voices calling in English, his own name being shouted, boots pounding up the slope. His comrades from Company G were charging forward, using the breach he had created, exploiting the gap in the defense. Japanese survivors were retreating through what tunnels remained intact, falling back to secondary positions deeper in the Shuri Line. The defense of Hen Hill was broken, not by artillery, not by tanks, not by coordinated infantry assault, broken by one American with a bag of grenades and the courage to do what no one thought possible. Kraft sat up slowly, inventory of his body revealing he was somehow still alive despite a dozen close calls. His uniform hung in tatters. Blood ran from cuts across his arms and face. His hands trembled with adrenaline come down. But he was alive, and the hill was taken. The soldiers of Company G reached the summit in a rush, weapons ready, expecting to fight for every remaining bunker. Instead, they found devastation, shattered positions, collapsed tunnels, the still smoking crater where the command bunker had stood. And in the middle of it all, Clarence Kraft, sitting on a chunk of coral, methodically reloading his M1 rifle as if he had simply completed a routine patrol. Men stared at him with expressions mixing awe and disbelief. Someone handed him a canteen. Someone else began checking him for serious wounds. The body count came later. At least 25 Japanese soldiers confirmed dead from Kraft's direct action. The grenades and satchel charge had been devastatingly effective in the confined spaces of bunkers and tunnels. Secondary explosions and cave collapses likely killed more, bodies that would never be recovered from the rubble. Approximately 70 additional enemy casualties resulted from the collapse of the position, as Company G exploited the breach, as other Japanese units retreated rather than be cut off, as the entire sector of the Shuri Line buckled under pressure. For the Japanese 62nd Division, the loss of Hen Hill represented more than tactical setback. It meant American forces could now observe and direct fire across terrain they had held secure for weeks. Mortar positions in the caves became untenable, exposed to direct fire from above. Supply routes were compromised. The entire defensive scheme for this sector had to be revised, units pulled back to secondary positions, further shrinking the defensive perimeter. The psychological impact hit just as hard. If one American could do this, what else were they capable of? Lieutenant Colonel responsible for this sector personally questioned survivors from Hen Hill. The accounts varied in details but agreed on essentials. One man, moving impossibly fast, grenades that seemed endless, positions destroyed in rapid succession, no time to coordinate response, no time to reinforce, just explosions and death, and then Americans everywhere. The lieutenant colonel wrote in his after-action report that the attack demonstrated American soldiers' individual initiative had become as dangerous as their material superiority. No amount of fortification could stop men willing to assault alone. For Company G, the aftermath was surreal. They had spent 3 days battering themselves against Hen Hill, losing friends, gaining nothing. Then Kraft stood up and took it in less than an hour. The company commander submitted immediate recommendation for Medal of Honor. Every witness statement corroborated the same impossible story. Kraft's platoon sergeant, veteran of 3 campaigns, said he had never seen anything like it. That men would attempt such actions in movies, that real soldiers had more sense. Except Kraft had done it anyway, and survived, and won. The word spread through the 96th Division, then through adjacent units, then across the entire island. Stories tend to grow in combat, details added, facts embellished. But with Hen Hill, embellishment was unnecessary. The truth was already beyond belief. Division intelligence officers interviewed Kraft extensively, trying to extract tactical lessons for other units. What they found was difficult to systematize: speed, aggression, perfect grenade accuracy, willingness to accept risk that any sane person would refuse. These weren't things you could teach in training manuals. Kraft himself remained almost embarrassingly modest. In interviews conducted days later, when the adrenaline had worn off and the magnitude of what he had done began to sink in, he downplayed his actions. He said he had simply done his job, that someone needed to take that hill, that he happened to have grenades and knew how to throw them, that he got lucky more than anything. His commanders didn't see it that way. Luck might explain surviving one close call. 14 grenade throws, each one lethal, each one accurate enough to destroy its target. That wasn't luck. That was skill combined with courage bordering on the superhuman. The Medal of Honor recommendation moved through channels with unusual speed. Normally, such awards required extensive investigation, multiple witness statements, verification from officers who weren't even present at the action. But Hen Hill had been witnessed by hundreds of soldiers from positions around the base of the hill. Dozens provided statements. Officers from regiment and division had watched through binoculars. There was no doubt about what happened. No controversy about whether the action merited the nation's highest award. The paperwork was approved at every level. Medical examination revealed Kraft had sustained multiple minor wounds during the assault, shrapnel cuts, bruises from blast concussion, partial hearing loss in one ear from the satchel charge explosion, but nothing serious enough to evacuate. He returned to duty with his unit, though company commanders were now reluctant to send him on particularly dangerous missions. When you have a Medal of Honor recipient in your command, you don't throw him away on routine patrols. Kraft protested. He hadn't done it for recognition. He had done it to help his friends, to end the stalemate, to take the hill that was killing Company G, one failed assault at a time. The tactical impact rippled outward. Other units facing similar fortified positions began emphasizing grenade warfare in their assault plans. Supply requests for Mk second grenades increased dramatically. Training exercises focused on rapid grenade throwing, on cooking fuses, on accurately bombing bunkers from close range. Some young soldiers volunteered for solo infiltration missions, inspired by Kraft's example. Their officers usually talked them out of it. Kraft's assault had worked through a combination of skill, courage, and luck that couldn't be replicated on command. The Japanese response revealed how deeply the action had affected them. Intelligence intercepts showed enemy commanders discussing the Hen Hill loss, trying to understand how their defense had failed. Some reports claimed demonic Americans who couldn't be killed. Others focused on the endless supply of grenades, the material abundance that allowed one soldier to carry enough explosives to destroy an entire position. The psychological warfare value was significant. Japanese troops defending similar hills now had to consider that any American soldier might attempt what Kraft had done. Within days, engineers improved the positions around captured Hen Hill. Bunkers were reinforced to face the other direction, now part of the American line instead of the Japanese. Artillery observers moved into the summit positions, directing fire onto Japanese positions that had been safe for weeks. The tactical advantage gained from one man's courage cascaded through the entire sector. Attacks that had stalled for days suddenly made progress. Positions that seemed impregnable began to fall. The Mk2 fragmentation grenade embodied everything that made American industrial warfare devastating. The design dated back to World War I, refined through decades of testing, optimized for mass production. By 1945, factories across the United States produced these grenades at staggering rates. Monthly production exceeded 2 million units. That was enough to give every American soldier on Okinawa 50 grenades each and still have surplus for training and stockpiling. The abundance was strategic. It meant American infantry could use grenades liberally, could throw them to suppress positions, could saturate defensive positions with explosive force. The manufacturing process had been streamlined to the point where a single factory could produce 20,000 grenades per day. The cast iron bodies came from foundries that had been making civilian products just years before. The TNT filling was standardized, precisely measured for consistency. The fuse mechanisms were assembled by workers who had never seen combat, but whose labor was just as crucial to victory. This was industrial warfare at its purest. The home front wasn't separate from the battlefront. Every grenade thrown on Okinawa connected directly to factories in Pennsylvania, Ohio, California. Compare that to Japanese production. The Type 97 hand grenade was technically effective, but Japanese industry produced them in numbers measured in thousands, not millions. Japanese soldiers were trained to conserve grenades, to throw them only when absolutely necessary, because resupply was impossible. An American soldier who ran out of grenades could request more and receive a crate by the next day. A Japanese soldier who ran out simply had no more. This disparity affected tactics at every level. Americans could afford to use grenades for suppression. Japanese had to save them for critical moments. The technical specifications revealed deeper truths. The Mk2's fuse was almost foolproof. Pull the pin, release the lever, 4 to 5 seconds to detonation. Simple enough that scared teenagers could use it effectively in combat. The Japanese Type 97 required striking the fuse against a hard surface before throwing, adding complexity that caused fumbles under stress. American grenades had standardized fuse timings. Japanese grenades showed significant variation, some detonating early, some late, because quality control in Japanese factories had deteriorated as the war progressed. Kraft's assault demonstrated how individual initiative, when backed by material abundance, could achieve results all out of proportion to numbers involved. The Japanese had created a fortress designed to stop regiment-sized attacks, but their planning assumed American abundance would be primarily in tanks, artillery, air support. They built defenses deep enough to survive shelling, positioned machine guns to stop infantry rushes. They didn't plan for one man carrying 14 grenades moving too fast to stop. The failure wasn't in their tactics or courage. It was in the fundamental math of industrial production. American logistics made Kraft's assault possible before he even conceived the idea. The grenades he carried had been manufactured in Illinois, shipped to California, loaded onto transport ships, convoyed across the Pacific through submarine-infested waters, unloaded on Okinawan beaches under occasional artillery fire, trucked to forward supply dumps, distributed to battalion supply, handed out to company supply sergeants, and finally issued to individual soldiers. That entire supply chain had to function flawlessly for Kraft to have 14 grenades in his bag on May 31, 1945. And it did function. Flawlessly. That was American industrial power. The cost differential was staggering. A single Mk2 grenade cost the U.S. government approximately 50 cents to manufacture. Training soldiers to use them effectively cost perhaps another 50 cents per soldier when calculated across millions of trainees. That $1 investment per grenade multiplied by the millions produced created an arsenal that no other nation could match. Japan couldn't compete with that math. Neither could Germany. Both Axis powers had skilled soldiers, effective tactics, and defensive positions that should have been impregnable. What they didn't have was the industrial capacity to supply their troops as lavishly as America supplied theirs. Radio communications played a supporting role in Kraft's success, though he never used a radio during the assault. Company G's command post maintained radio contact with battalion headquarters throughout the action. As Kraft advanced, officers relayed his progress, requested artillery suppression on flanking positions, called for medical standby. The SCR-300 backpack radio used by infantry companies allowed this coordination in real time. Japanese defenders on Hen Hill had no such advantage. Their communications ran through wire lines that Kraft's grenades cut with each position destroyed. By the time he reached the summit, Japanese commanders in rear areas had lost contact with the hill entirely. The after-action analysis conducted by division staff examined every aspect of the assault for lessons that could be applied elsewhere. They calculated Kraft's rate of advance, approximately 3 yards per minute under fire, much faster than standard tactical doctrine recommended. They measured his grenade accuracy. 14 throws, at least 11 confirmed hits that destroyed positions, a success rate above 80%. They assessed the psychological impact. Japanese defenses in adjacent sectors showed reduced effectiveness for days afterward, defenders more willing to retreat than hold position. Training programs across the Pacific Theater incorporated Kraft's tactics within weeks. Not the solo assault, which remained too dangerous to encourage, but the emphasis on aggressive grenade use, on cooking fuses to deny enemies time to react, on targeting bunker apertures with precision throws. Grenade ranges at training camps saw increased activity. Soldiers practiced throwing while moving, while under simulated fire, while exhausted. The message was clear. Grenades were not just supporting weapons, they were decisive tools when used with skill and courage. The strategic implications extended beyond tactics. Hen Hill's fall contributed to the broader collapse of the Shuri Line. Within a week, Japanese commanders ordered withdrawal from the entire sector, pulling back to final defensive positions on the southern tip of Okinawa. That withdrawal became a rout in some areas, as American pressure intensified and Japanese cohesion deteriorated. The battle for Okinawa would continue for another 3 weeks, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The fortress had cracked. Individual actions like Kraft's contributed to that cracking, proving that even the most elaborate defenses could be broken by soldiers with the right combination of courage, skill, and weaponry. The comparison between American and Japanese hand grenades revealed broader truths about each nation's approach to warfare. The MK-Seku represented standardization, mass production, and the philosophy that abundant, adequate weapons defeated scarce, superior ones. Every MK-tune performed identically. Every soldier trained on them learned the same techniques. Quality control ensured that a grenade manufactured in January performed the same as one made in December. This standardization extended across the entire American arsenal, from rifles to artillery shells to aircraft engines. It was boring, it was unglamorous, it was devastatingly effective. Japanese grenades, by contrast, showed increasing variation as the war progressed. Early production Type 97s were well-made, reliable weapons. By 1945, with Japanese industry under sustained bombing and suffering from raw material shortages, quality deteriorated. Fuse timings became unpredictable. Casings were thinner, producing less effective fragmentation. Some grenades failed to detonate at all. Japanese soldiers couldn't trust their equipment the way Americans could. That psychological burden, that uncertainty about whether your weapons would function when needed, added invisible weight to every combat action. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. In 1944 alone, the United States produced over 43 million hand grenades of all types. Japan's total production for the entire war was approximately 12 million. By 1945, with American submarines having strangled Japanese shipping and American bombers having destroyed much of Japanese industrial capacity, production had fallen to a trickle. Meanwhile, American factories were still running at full capacity, still churning out millions of grenades that would never be thrown because the war ended first. The surplus grenades filled warehouses, were sold as scrap, or were simply destroyed. That was abundance so complete it became waste. Kraft's Medal of Honor citation would eventually read like a compressed version of an epic. The official language couldn't capture the smell of cordite, the ringing ears, the heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through the chest, but it captured the essentials: single-handed assault, 25 enemy killed, 70 more casualties in the position's collapse, breakthrough that enabled company advance, action above and beyond the call of duty. The citation joined thousands of others from World War II, each one representing a moment when an ordinary person did something extraordinary. The medal itself would be presented months later, after Okinawa fell, after Kraft had been rotated back to rear areas, after the immediate danger had passed. President Truman would place the sky blue ribbon around his neck in a White House ceremony, attended by other recipients, by generals and admirals, by congressmen who had never heard a shot fired in anger. Kraft would stand at attention, uncomfortable in his dress uniform, wishing he was back with his unit, with the men who understood what Hen Hill had really been like. The battle for Okinawa officially ended on June 22, 1945. 3 months of fighting, over 12,000 American dead, more than 100,000 Japanese military casualties, civilian losses that remain difficult to count accurately. The island was secured. Airfields were built. B-29s began flying from Okinawan runways to bomb the Japanese home islands. The invasion of Japan was scheduled for November 1st. Then atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. The invasion never happened. All those Okinawan battlefields, all those hills with names like Sugarloaf and Hen Hill and Chocolate Drop, they became footnotes to the bombs that ended the war. But the men who fought there remembered. Clarence Kraft returned home to California after the war, lived a quiet life, rarely spoke about what he had done. People who knew him casually never suspected he was a Medal of Honor recipient. He worked normal jobs, raised a family, attended veteran reunions where men who had been there understood without words needing to be spoken. The nightmares came sometimes, the sound of grenades detonating, the faces of Japanese soldiers in that last instant before the explosion, the terrible clarity of combat that made everything before and after seem slightly unreal. The Mk2 grenade remained in U.S. service for decades after the war. Korea, early Vietnam, slowly replaced by more modern designs but never forgotten. Soldiers in later wars trained with them, through practice versions on the same grenade ranges where Kraft and his generation had learned. The design was obsolete by the 1960s, superseded by smoother grenades that didn't snag on equipment, by more efficient explosive compositions, by fuses with more safety features. But obsolete didn't mean ineffective. It just meant the world had moved on. Hen Hill still exists. A gentle rise on an island that has become a major American military base, hosting thousands of troops, surrounded by modern infrastructure and highways and cities rebuilt from the ruins of 1945. Tour guides sometimes mention the battle. Japanese and American historians have walked the ground, identified where bunkers stood, tried to reconstruct how one man accomplished what seemed impossible. The coral has regrown, the scars have healed. Only the memories remain, fading as the veterans age and pass on. What Kraft did that day embodied something essential about the American way of war in World War II. It wasn't just superior numbers, or better technology, or industrial abundance. It was the individual initiative that military culture encouraged, the willingness of ordinary soldiers to attempt extraordinary actions, the combination of personal courage and material support. Other armies had brave soldiers. Other nations produced effective weapons. But the United States had created a system where men like Kraft could be given bags full of grenades and trusted to use them effectively, where supply chains stretched across oceans to ensure those grenades were always available, where industrial capacity was so vast that throwing 14 grenades in one assault wasn't waste. It was just Thursday. The Japanese understood this by 1945. The intercepted communications, the prisoner interrogations, the documents captured from headquarters, all revealed the same truth. They weren't being defeated by superior Japanese soldiers or tactics. They were being buried under an avalanche of American production, American logistics, American abundance that no amount of courage or sacrifice could overcome. Hen Hill was a microcosm of that reality. One American soldier with 14 grenades could destroy a position that 50 Japanese soldiers had fortified for weeks, not because American soldiers were better, but because American factories could give that soldier 14 grenades without thinking twice about the cost. The legacy of actions like Craft's extends beyond military history. It speaks to what individuals can accomplish when properly equipped and properly motivated. Craft didn't storm Hen Hill because he was ordered to. He did it because he saw a problem that needed solving, because he had the tools to solve it, and because he possessed the courage to act. That combination, seeing what needs to be done, having the means to do it, and willing yourself to take action, that's rare. Most people have one or two of those elements. Craft had all three, for just long enough to change the course of a battle. Stories like this show that wars are fought in factories as much as on battlefields, won by logisticians as much as by riflemen. The grenade that destroyed the command bunker on Hen Hill was forged in a factory somewhere in America by a worker who never saw combat. That worker's contribution was just as essential as Craft's throw. The system that connected them, that turned raw materials into weapons, transported those weapons across the world and placed them in the hands of soldiers who knew how to use them. That system was America's decisive advantage in World War II. In the next episode, I'll bring another rarely told detail that turned battles upside down. Another moment when technology, courage, and industrial power combined to create history. Another story from the hidden archives of World War II, where the war was fought not just with bullets and bombs, but with the decisions and sacrifices of individuals whose names have been forgotten by everyone except those who fought beside them. Subscribe and follow the series so you don't miss it. These stories deserve to be remembered, deserve to be told, deserve to be preserved before the last veterans pass on, and we lose the living connection to the greatest conflict in human history.